Imagine you are standing in the scorching, dusty heat of modern-day southern Iraq.
Right.
You are looking down into this archaeological trench, and you brush the sand away from a tiny baked clay cylinder.
A cylinder that was carved around, 4500 BCE.
Exactly. Now imagine taking that tiny artifact back to a lab. You analyze the geometry etched into its surface, and you realize that the math carved into this 6,000-year-old piece of clay, well, it perfectly models modern quantum wave resonance.
Yeah, it induces a genuine sense of historical vertigo.
Vertigo is the perfect word for it. You look at it, and for a split second, the timeline of human history just shatters.
Because your brain simply cannot reconcile the chronological date of the object. I mean, we were talking about a Neolithic, early Bronze Age context.
Right.
You just can't reconcile that with the sheer terrifying complexity of the design.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have an incredibly provocative stack of sources on the table today, specifically focusing on the research papers Sumerian Convergence and the Sumerian Blueprint.
Really fascinating stuff in these.
Oh, absolutely. And our mission for you listening right now is to journey back to the oldest written civilization on Earth, the Sumerians. We are exploring a highly specific, deeply unsettling question.
Were these ancient people describing systems that behave surprisingly like modern technology?
Right. But before we take a single step forward, we need to draw some very hard boundaries.
Yeah, this is crucial for how you process this information. We are not here to talk about magic.
Definitely not.
We are not entertaining literal interpretations of mythology, and we are absolutely not trying to prove that, ancient aliens came down and handed humanity advanced gadgets.
No flying saucers today.
None. What we are doing today is a rigorous, impartial exploration of patterns. We are looking at the tension between bizarre coincidence and meaningful structure.
And I want to drill down into that tension immediately, because the premise itself that an ancient clay tablet might resemble a modern circuit board or a quantum model, it's thrilling, but it inherently challenges our collective ego.
It really does.
We operate on this comforting expectation that history is a straight line,
Yeah, a ladder we're climbing.
Exactly. We started with stone tools, slowly built basic villages, eventually figured out plumbing, and then brick by tedious brick, we arrived at the smartphone. It's a clean progression from primitive to advanced.
And we cling to that narrative. It's an evolutionary model of progress, and it makes intuitive sense to us. We equate chronological recency with cognitive superiority.
Which is a huge assumption.
It's a fallacy, actually.
Yeah.
Biologically and anatomically, a human being living in Uruk in 4500 BCE had the exact same brain capacity you do.
The same hardware.
The exact same hardware for pattern recognition, complex reasoning, and abstract thought. So when we see a pattern in antiquity that looks like a modern technological system, our first instinct is usually to dismiss it entirely as a fluke.
Rather than sit in the uncomfortable space of asking the bigger question.
Right, asking, what if they possessed an identical capacity to observe the fundamental structures of reality and simply encoded them using a different vocabulary?
Wait, hold on. I need to stop you there, just so we are totally clear on the terms.
Sure.
When we say they were describing systems that, quote, behave like technology, are we talking about them actively mapping out physical laws? Or are we just seeing what we want to see?
That is the big question.
Because, if I look out of an airplane window at 30,000 feet, a sprawling city grid looks exactly like a silicon microchip.
It really does, yeah.
The highways are the conductive pathways, the buildings are the capacitors, but the city isn't a computer.
That is the perfect distinction to make. The city is not a computer, but the city and the microchip share structural rules because they are solving the exact same physics problem.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
To move energy, data, or human beings efficiently from point A to point B without a bottleneck, the laws of physics dictate certain optimal geometric patterns.
Right, the path of least resistance.
Exactly. The city planners didn't copy a microchip. They collided with the same physical constraints that an electrical engineer does.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So the question posed by our sources is, were the Sumerians tapping into those optimal universal patterns?
Which means we aren't suggesting they were plugging in routers or coding in Python.
No, definitely not.
We are asking if they mapped out the bedrock of reality so accurately that it merely looks like modern tech to our 21st century eyes.
Precisely.
And to even begin to untangle that, we have to look at the specific moment in time when this explosion of structure happened. We have to go back to the cradle of civilization.
Southern Mesopotamia. specifically the region focused around the ancient city of Uruk.
During what we call the Uruk period, right?
Yes, beginning around 4000 to 4500 BCE.
According to our sources, what happens in Uruk isn't a slow, casual stroll into civilization. It was a sprint.
An absolute explosion.
Yeah.
Scholars refer to it as the rapid leap.
Mm-hmm.
And while the exact timeline is a massive point of debate in mainstream archaeology, even the most conservative historical estimates agree that the advancement of Sumerian civilization was remarkably, almost inexplicably fast.
Like overnight in historical terms.
Basically, yeah. We are talking about the sudden, simultaneous emergence of highly complex systems. You have the invention of cuneiform writing.
Out of nowhere.
You have complex, formalized mathematics. You have the sudden appearance of sophisticated codified law, standardized weights and measures, mass-produced pottery, and advanced astronomy.
I mean, if complex systems usually require thousands of iterations to develop, how does a society just invent a fully realized legal code and a highly divisible mathematical framework out of nowhere?
It defies the standard model.
Think about the evolution of flight. We had gliders, then the Wright brothers' fragile canvas plane, then prop planes, then jets. You can track the slow lineage of the engineering.
Zip by step.
But with the Sumerian leap, it feels like humanity went from a conceptual kite straight to a commercial airliner. The archaeological strata just don't show the hundreds of generations of trial and error you would expect.
And that lack of transitional strata is what makes the Sumerian texts themselves so fascinating. Because according to the Sumerians, they didn't slowly invent these systems.
Right. They explicitly state that they were given to them.
Yes. The ancient texts attribute this massive influx of foundational knowledge to a group called the Anunnaki.
The Anunnaki, a word that translates roughly to those who came from the heavens, or princely offspring.
Yes. And this specific translation is where the interpretation of history violently splits into two camps.
So let's unpack the two camps.
Okay, so on one side you have mainstream Orthodox archaeology and anthropology. They look at the Anunnaki and state, quite rationally, that this is strictly foundational myth.
Right, a story they told themselves.
Ancient people didn't have the sociological framework to understand how their ancestors slowly developed agriculture or law over centuries, so they attributed it to the gods, the sky, the heavens.
It's a metaphor for inspiration.
Exactly. It's the ancient equivalent of saying, I had a eureka moment.
But then you have alternative researchers looking at the exact same texts and asking a very different question.
Yeah, they are looking at the sheer volume and structural precision of the knowledge attributed to the Anunnaki and asking, what if it isn't entirely metaphorical?
Which is a valid philosophical query, provided we don't fall into the trap of literalism.
Right. If an ancient culture experienced a massive cognitive shift, a sudden, profound downloading of structural awareness about how the universe works, they do not have the vocabulary of neuroscience, complex systems theory, or quantum mechanics to describe it.
Obviously not. They have the vocabulary of the earth, the stars, and divinity.
Exactly. So those who came from the heavens might simply be the most accurate linguistic tool they had to describe knowledge that feels universally true.
Knowledge that feels like it descends upon you from the fabric of reality rather than being built by human hands.
That's a great way to put it.
You know, I am a huge advocate for what I call the messy middle of interpretation.
The messy middle. I like that.
Because if we assume they were just making up fairy tales about sky gods, we treat them like children and strip them of their observational genius.
We do.
But if we act as stenographers for literal sky beings, we strip humanity of its own capacity for brilliant innovation.
Both extremes rob humans of their agency.
Exactly. The messy middle requires us to assume the ancients were communicating something structurally real while doing the hard work of translating their poetic language into our empirical language.
And if we apply that exact lens, looking for non-metaphorical structure beneath the mythological language, we have to examine their physical artifacts. We can't just rely on text.
Right. We need physical evidence.
Which brings us to a perfect test case from our sources, the VA-243 cylinder seal.
Okay, let's really unpack this artifact. For you listening, a cylinder seal is a small, carved cylinder, usually made of stone or semi-precious gem.
Yeah, about the size of your thumb usually.
The Sumerians would roll these across wet clay documents to leave a continuous, raised 3D impression. They were used as administrative signatures, legal seals, or protective amulets.
And the VA-243, which is currently housed in the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, is one of the most hotly debated seals in existence.
Okay, so if we steelman the mainstream interpretation first, Orthodox historians view the imagery on the seal as entirely symbolic.
Yeah. It depicts a seated deity, some standing figures, and between them, what appears to be a central star or sun surrounded by 11 smaller spheres.
And the mainstream consensus is that this is an agricultural or religious motif, a sunburst.
Right. The surrounding dots might represent stars or seeds or just aesthetic space fillers.
But the sources highlight that a minority of alternative researchers are focusing intensely on the geometry of that central sun pattern.
Because they argue that if you strip away the assumption that it's purely decorative, the pattern functions less like a drawing of a star and more like a functional diagram.
Wait, functional diagram like a schematic?
Yes. To understand their argument, we have to establish the difference between decorative geometry and functional geometry.
Break that down for me.
So decorative geometry is aesthetic. An artist might draw a sun with 8 rays, or 10 rays, or 12. The angles might vary. The dots might be placed wherever they look best.
Right.
It relies on a general sense of symmetry, but the exact proportions don't matter. Functional geometry, on the other hand, is entirely dictated by physics.
Oh, wow.
The angles, the spacing, the spatial relationships between the nodes, they must be mathematically exact. If you alter the angles of functional geometry by even a degree, it ceases to represent the physical law it's tied to.
Right. It's the difference between someone doodling a cool, symmetrical zigzag on a napkin and an electrical engineer drawing the exact schematic for a radio antenna.
Exactly.
One is a picture, the other is a machine on paper.
Precisely. And the provocation from these alternative researchers is that the specific proportions, the phase angles, and the spatial relationships of the central 6-pointed body and the 11 surrounding spheres on the VA243 seal align uncomfortably well with functional geometry.
Uncomfortably well. I love that phrasing.
Specifically, they argue it mirrors a 2D representation of an electromagnetic wave interference pattern.
Whoa.
Yeah. They look at the exact spacing and argue that it models nodes and antinodes, the points where overlapping waves either amplify or cancel each other out.
Wait, I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't it vastly more likely that an ancient artisan just, liked symmetry?
It's very possible.
I mean, if you are going to draw a star, you naturally space the rays out evenly. Are we just reverse engineering incredibly complex physics out of a simple sunburst?
That is the crux of the skeptical argument, and it is a strong one. But the counter-argument is that the math is too specific.
Too specific how?
Well, in acoustic and electromagnetic physics, when waves interact, they create geometric structures. This is the study of cymatics.
Big cymatics.
Right. If you vibrate a metal plate covered in sand at a specific frequency, the sand will instantly organize into highly complex geometric shapes.
I've seen videos of that online. It's like magic.
It looks like magic, but it's pure physics. The researchers looking at VA243 argue that the seal isn't just even. It displays the precise angular relationships found when specific frequencies intersect.
Okay, that is wild.
Now, let's be absolutely clear. Neither the sources nor I am suggesting that the Sumerians were building electromagnetic transmitters in 4500 BCE.
Obviously not. They weren't hiding cell towers inside the ziggurats.
But the question remains, why would a shape explicitly designed by the Sumerians to represent the cosmos, the heavens, the fundamental order of the gods, map so cleanly to the exact mathematics of a modern wave interference pattern?
This brings up one of my absolute favorite analogies.
Oh, yeah.
Think about a child on a beach who finds a stick and starts drawing a spiral shell in the sand.
Okay.
They're just trying to draw a pretty shape they saw, but in doing so, they are inadvertently drawing a perfect Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio.
Yes.
The child has zero concept of the mathematical formula. They don't know the math, but the math dictates the shape of reality.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
The shell grows according to the golden ratio because that is the most biologically and mathematically efficient way for nature to construct it. So the child is just drawing reality, and reality happens to be profound math.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. Because if you are a civilization deeply, existentially attuned to the natural world,
Which they were.
very much so, attuned to the movement of the stars, the cycles of the seasons, the harmonics of sound and vibration, you are going to internalize the geometries of nature.
You just absorb it.
Right, you might abstract those into your art, your seals, and your architecture without ever writing out the formal algebraic equations that govern them. It is intuitive physics, represented as aesthetic art.
So if they were embedding functional geometry into their physical art, did that same systems-level thinking bleed into how they govern their society?
Oh, absolutely.
Because moving from physical geometry to abstract thought, The sources suggest the Sumerians were structuring their very concepts of human society like, well, modern software.
This is perhaps the most conceptually mind-bending part of the Sumerian worldview. We need to examine the concept of the ME.
Okay, let's do it. It's spelled M-A-E.
Yes, spelled M-E but pronounced me.
The M-E. According to translations of Sumerian texts, the M-E were divine laws, powers, or foundational attributes of civilization.
We are talking about overarching concepts. Things like kingship, wisdom, truth, craftsmanship, law.
Prostitution was one of them, right?
Yes, even that. And things as specific as the art of woodworking or the brewing of beer.
Which is incredibly specific. Now, on the surface, that sounds like standard mythological fare. In ancient Greece, you have Athena holding the power of wisdom or Apollo holding the power of music.
But the Sumerian ME are entirely different. The strange defining characteristic of the ME in these texts is that they are described as perfectly transferable objects.
Transferable?
Yes. They are not innate mystical qualities bound to the soul of a god. They are discrete items that can be held in a hand, physically loaded onto a boat, given, traded, or as is famous in Sumerian myth, Solon.
Yes, the myth of Inanna and Enki.
Exactly.
Inanna, the goddess of love and war, basically gets Enki, the god of wisdom, incredibly drunk. And she steals the ME of civilization from him, loads them onto her boat, and takes them back to her city of Uruk to make it powerful.
Exactly. And the sources draw an incredibly modern conceptual parallel here. The texts liken the ME to encoded authority, to data packets, to digital permissions.
Wow.
It is described as being akin to writing about apps or software licenses in 3000 BCE.
Wait, help me understand the cognitive leap here. How is this different from, say, an Egyptian pharaoh just giving a governor a magical amulet to rule a city?
It requires a massive leap in abstract logic.
Okay.
Think about it. In most primitive societies, a king is king because he's the strongest, or because he claims a direct bloodline to the divine. The concept of kingship is entirely bound up biologically and spiritually in the physical person of the king.
Right. You cannot separate the power from the man holding the spear.
Exactly. If the king dies, the power dies, and someone new has to claim it. But the Sumerians separated the concept of the power from the person wielding it.
That is a huge shift.
It is. To take a totally abstract idea like kingship or wisdom, remove it from a human being, and conceptualize it as a discrete, transferable packet of data that exists independently of the user. That is the birth of objective systems over subjective individuals.
It's literally object-oriented programming for human civilization.
It really is.
I want you listening to try a thought experiment. Imagine you have a flash drive in your pocket. On that flash drive is an executable file called kingship.xi or advancedwoodworking.xa.
Right.
You hand that flash drive to your friend, they plug it in, and suddenly they possess the authority to rule or the skill to build furniture.
The linguistic structure of that metaphor is functionally identical to the Sumerian texts. When a god grants a ME of craftsmanship to a human city, it operates exactly like a systems administrator granting user admin rights on a digital server.
A literal permission slip.
Yes. You are being given an encoded permission that unlocks a function within the network of civilization.
If I tried to explain downloading a smartphone app to a Sumerian farmer in 4000 BCE, wouldn't it sound exactly word for word like receiving a ME from the heavens?
It would. And what's truly fascinating is the underlying philosophy it reveals about how they viewed the universe.
How so?
The Sumerians viewed reality as a programmed entity. The rules of society weren't arbitrary human inventions. They were underlying codes, the ME that ran the hardware of civilization.
So if you had the code, the civilization functioned smoothly.
And if the code was stolen, or if the ME were lost, the system crashed. They literally viewed societal collapse as a software failure.
That is mind-blowing. We treat intangible data today, our crypto, our digital photos, our software licenses, as highly valuable physical property.
And the Sumerians did the exact same thing with civic virtues.
Unbelievable. And this incredible ability to abstract, quantify, and encode reality wasn't just limited to philosophy or myth. It was intensely practical.
Extremely practical.
And it led them to design a mathematical tool that we still use today. A tool that modern researchers are discovering has shocking implications for complex physics.
We are talking about the Sumerian invention of the base 60 number system, sexagesimal math.
Which is, without a doubt, the deepest mathematical mystery of the ancient world.
It really is.
Okay, let's really break this down, because the mainstream, orthodox, historical view on why the Sumerians used base 60 is actually quite anatomical, isn't it?
Yes. If we steelman the mainstream view, Historians argue that base 60 was derived from a very clever method of counting on human hands.
Walk me through it.
If you look at one hand, you have 4 fingers, and each finger has 3 joints. If you use your thumb to point to each joint, you can count to 12 on one hand.
12 joints. Got it.
Then, if you use the 5 digits on your other hand to track how many times you've counted to 12, well, 5 times 12 equals 60.
It's a brilliant biological abacus.
It is.
And that makes perfect logical sense. But the alternative researchers in our sources are looking at base 60 not just as a convenient way to count grain using knuckle joints, but through the lens of complex systems theory.
Right. They are arguing that base 60 is the math of resonance.
Okay, to understand why, we have to look at the mechanics of the numbers themselves.
Exactly. Our modern world generally runs on 2 mathematical systems. Base 10, which we use for everyday counting, and base 2, or binary, which runs our computers.
Let's look at base 10 first.
So the number 10 is only divisible by whole numbers in a few ways. 1, 2, 5, and 10. That's 4 divisors.
Which is fine for counting money.
Right. But it gets incredibly messy if you need to divide things into thirds or quarters or sixths. 10 divided by 3 is 3.333, infinitely.
You instantly generate infinite decimals, which we call floating point fractions.
It's clunky geometry.
Yeah.
Now look at base 60. The number 60 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30, and 60.
That is 12 different divisors.
It is a mathematical powerhouse because you can slice the data up into almost any fundamental fraction halves, thirds, quarters, fifths, sixths.
And still deal exclusively with clean whole numbers.
Exactly.
I like to think of it like a high-resolution pixel grid versus a low-resolution one. Base 60 gives you so many more pixels or divisors to perfectly map a curve without any jagged, decimal-heavy edges.
That is an excellent analogy. And it becomes critical when we talk about modern computing and physics.
How so?
Well, in modern computing, binary base 2 is great for simple linear logic, on or off, a 1 or a 0.
Right.
But theoretical computational models show that when binary tries to calculate complex multidimensional geometric interactions, it struggles.
Because of the fractions.
Yes, it generates rounding errors because it's constantly dealing with those messy infinite fractions. Base 60, because of its extreme divisibility, can simplify certain complex patterns that crash binary systems.
Wow. And the sources point out that this extreme divisibility makes base 60 exceptionally well-suited for what engineers call resonance problems. Explain to me how the number 60 maps to wave harmonics better than base 2 or base 10.
Think of resonance as the way different wave frequencies interact. If you pluck a string on a guitar, it vibrates at a specific frequency, creating a wave.
Okay.
If another string nearby is tuned to a complementary frequency, it will begin to vibrate too, purely from the invisible waves moving through the air.
I've seen that happen.
Right. That interaction, how those waves combine, how their peaks and troughs overlap, amplify, or cancel each other out, is a resonance problem. Now map that onto a circle. A wave operates in cycles, or degrees of a circle.
And thanks to the Sumerians, a circle is 360 degrees, which is a multiple of 60.
Exactly. When you are calculating shifting frequencies, harmonics, and phase angles in a 360-degree space, you are constantly dividing that space.
You need to calculate what happens at 1/3 of the wave cycle, or 1/5, or 1/6.
And if you use base 10, dividing a cycle into thirds gives you a jagged, infinite decimal. The calculation degrades.
But with base 60,
if you use base 60, dividing the cycle into thirds, quarters, or fifths yields perfect, whole, precise integers.
360 divided by 3 is 120. Exactly.
By 6 is 60. Exactly.
Wow.
To calculate intersecting waves in 3D space without generating massive system-crashing fractional errors, you need a math system that natively handles complex division. Base 60 handles these physical interactions flawlessly.
Okay, I have to stop and push back against you here.
Fair enough.
Because you are blowing my mind, but I'm getting skeptical. Are you seriously suggesting that Sumerian scribes, sitting in mud brick temples in 4000 BCE, were doing quantum mechanics and calculating 3D wave interference patterns?
No, absolutely not. And that is where the danger of over-extrapolation lies. I'm not suggesting they understood the physics of quantum mechanics.
Okay, good.
What I am suggesting, and what the mathematical analysis shows, is that by painstakingly observing the cycles of the moon, the sun, and the stars, they map the results of those physics.
They map the symptom, not the disease.
Exactly. The universe operates on wave mechanics. Celestial orbits are wave cycles.
Right.
The Sumerians watched those cycles, and to map them accurately, They developed a math system that perfectly mirrored the cyclical nature of reality. They didn't know why B60 was the foundational math of quantum mechanics. They just knew it was the only math that perfectly mapped the heavens.
It's like finding a master key on the street.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the complex tumbling mechanisms of every lock in the building or who built the doors. You just try the key, realize it opens every door effortlessly, and keep using it. They found the master key of cyclical math.
And we are still using their key. Every time you measure an angle or look at the 60 minutes on a clock, you're using the Sumerian master key.
That is incredible. So we have functional wave-like geometry on ancient cylinder seals. We have software-like object-oriented logic in the ME. And we have highly divisible quantum-ready math in base 60.
A lot of evidence.
At this point, the human brain is practically screaming that there is a deep, profound connection here. The patterns feel too precise.
Which is exactly why this is the precise moment we need to fiercely apply the brakes. We must engage with the skeptic's counter-argument.
Let's address the skeptics directly. Because the main criticism of everything we just talked about is simple and it's devastating. We might just be tricking ourselves.
We have to acknowledge the cognitive reality of human beings. We are hardwired, biologically and neurologically, for pattern recognition.
We see patterns everywhere.
In psychology and neuroscience, this is known as pareidolia. It is the phenomenon that causes your brain to look up at a random formation of clouds and clearly see the shape of a dog, or look at the craters on the moon and see a human face.
Why does the brain do that? Why are we so obsessed with finding meaning in random noise?
It is a predictive processing survival mechanism.
From an evolutionary standpoint.
Yes. Think about the early hominid who looks into a chaotic, messy jungle and instantly recognizes the subtle, structured pattern of a tiger's stripes hidden in the brush.
That hominid survives.
The one whose brain just processes it as random noise gets eaten.
Wow, right.
Over millions of years, evolution tuned our brains to be hyper-aggressive, pattern-matching inference engines. We are so desperate to find order in chaos that we will actively hallucinate structure where none exists, just to be safe.
So the orthodox historian looks at our deep dive and says, you modern people live in a world completely obsessed with quantum computing, apps, digital permissions, and electromagnetic wave models.
Exactly.
So when you look at ancient Sumer, you are just seeing faces in the clouds. You are taking the modern reality you understand and projecting it backward onto their clay tablets and knuckle counting.
It is a powerful, highly rational argument. Science requires rigorous doubt. We cannot just accept an anomaly because the aesthetic of it feels exciting.
But the sources provide a really crucial counter-distinction to the pareidolia argument.
They do.
Random hallucinated patterns usually feel vague. The face in the cloud only looks like a face if the wind doesn't blow and if you squint and tilt your head.
Right. The illusion is fragile.
The moment you examine it closely, the structural integrity falls apart. But these Sumerian examples do not fall apart under scrutiny. They get more structured.
That's the difference.
The mathematical divisors of base 60 aren't an optical illusion. They are an objective, unyielding mathematical reality.
Yes.
The specific phrasing of the ME as a transferable object isn't a mistranslation. It is the literal bedrock of their mythological texts.
This raises a very difficult question for Orthodox historians about the threshold of coincidence.
Let's talk about that threshold.
Yes, hallucinating patterns is a danger, but dismissing highly structured, highly functional data as near coincidence can be just as intellectually lazy as claiming it's the work of ancient aliens.
Definitely.
If a mathematical system perfectly solves a resonance problem that modern binary struggles with, simply waving it away as a glitch in our pattern recognition software doesn't solve the historical mystery. It actively ignores it.
I'm going to push back against the skeptic here. At what point does coincidence become a statistical impossibility?
It's a valid question.
If I roll a pair of dice and get snake eyes, that's coincidence. If I roll snake eyes 1,000 times in a row, the dice are loaded.
Right.
At what point do we have to admit that the Sumerians were tapping into the same bedrock reality that we are?
That is the fragile boundary line between skepticism and discovery.
So for you listening, how do you hold both of these things in your head? How do you maintain the awe of these ancient structures without losing your rational skepticism?
You do it by abandoning the two extreme camps we discussed at the very beginning.
The literalists and the dismissive skeptics.
Exactly. If we confidently rule out the idea that the Sumerians had literal silicon quantum computers buried in the sand, And we simultaneously rule out the idea that base 60 and the ME are just random, meaningless optical illusions of history.
Then what's left?
We are left with a third, much more profound possibility.
And this brings us to the absolute core of the deep ducks, the bigger idea.
The ultimate takeaway from our sources isn't about ancient high-tech gadgets.
Thank goodness.
The true subtlety, the real mind-bending concept we have to grapple with, is that human understanding does not move in a straight line.
It's not a ladder we are slowly climbing.
No. Ideas peer, they flourish, they completely disappear for millennia into the fires of societal collapse.
The Dark Ages.
And then they reappear centuries later in entirely new forms. The structure of human knowledge isn't a straight line, it's a recurring wave.
Oh, wave.
And this recurring wave of understanding is not inheritance. We didn't smoothly pass the exact mechanisms of base 60 down continuously from teacher to student over thousands of years until it reached a quantum physics lab.
Right, the chain was broken many times.
Exactly. Nor is it intervention, where knowledge is beamed down by aliens. The scientific word for what we're seeing is convergence.
Convergence. Let's really break down the theory of convergence.
Let's borrow an analogy from evolutionary biology. Think about the evolution of the eye.
Okay.
The complex, camera-like eye, complete with a lens, a retina, a cornea, and a pupil, didn't just evolve once in the history of life on Earth.
It did.
No. It evolved completely independently in vertebrates, like humans, and in cephalopods, like the octopus.
Wait, really?
Yes. The human lineage and the octopus lineage split hundreds of millions of years ago, long before either creature possessed complex eyes.
So we didn't inherit the eye from a common ancestor. We both built it separately from scratch.
Exactly. We independently arrived at the exact same incredibly complex biological structure.
Why?
Because sight is a universal advantage. And the physics of light in our universe dictates that a lens focusing photons onto a retina is simply the most optimal way to capture visual data.
The environment forces the design.
The environment, the physics of reality, force both species to converge on the exact same solution.
That is staggering to think about.
It is.
So translating that biological concept to human consciousness, are you saying that human cultures independently evolve specific mathematical and conceptual frameworks because those frameworks reflect the fundamental, inescapable truths of the universe?
Yes. That is the theory of cognitive and societal convergence.
Wow.
If you are a civilization trying to solve the problem of how to organize a large-scale society, you might eventually hit upon the concept of abstracting authority into transferable packets, the ME.
Because it's the most efficient way to run a society.
Right. And if you are a civilization trying to measure the cyclical movements of the heavens, you might eventually hit upon a highly divisible math system, base 60.
You didn't inherit it from anyone, and no one from the stars gave it to you.
You collided with it because it is a fundamental property of reality.
It's like two people on opposite sides of the planet living thousands of years apart who both independently invent the wheel.
Perfect example.
The Sumerian engineer in 4500 BCE and the modern mechanical engineer don't need to speak to each other to both realize that a circle drastically reduces friction.
They don't.
They are both trying to solve the problem of moving heavy things, and they are both constrained by the exact same physical laws of gravity and friction.
And as the sources note, convergence is incredibly powerful because it is much harder to dismiss than coincidence.
Coincidence implies a random, meaningless accident.
Exactly. Convergence implies a rigid underlying structure to reality that humans keep bumping into, forgetting, and then painfully bumping into again.
So the Sumerians were looking at the raw data of the cosmos, the stars, the human condition, the nature of power, and they essentially invented the wheel for encoding reality.
They built base 60 to map the cycles. They built the ME to map society.
And today, we are essentially just using a highly complex digital version of that exact same wheel. We didn't get it from them, but we arrived at the exact same station because it's the only station that exists.
Oh, it completely revolutionizes how you view history.
It really does.
It forces you to look at the timeline and ask how much profound structural knowledge has humanity gained, lost, and had to painstakingly rediscover over the millennia.
It makes the ancient world feel so much closer. It isn't a primitive past we have escaped. It is a mirror reflecting the exact same cognitive architecture we use today.
Indeed. It suggests that human ingenuity, our desperate drive to categorize and encode the universe, is not a modern invention. It is the defining characteristic of our species.
So, to summarize the incredible journey we've been on today, we started with the sudden, almost inexplicable leap of civilization in Uruk.
The rapid leap.
We unpacked the visual, wave-like geometry of the VA-243 cylinder seal, balancing the mainstream sunburst theory against functional electromagnetic math.
Yep.
We explored the software-like, object-oriented logic of the Sumerian ME, treating civic virtues as downloadable permissions.
Like an app.
And we dove deep into the mathematically resonant powerhouse of the base 60 number system, exploring how high divisibility perfectly maps quantum wave cycles.
We've examined the very real biological human tendency to hallucinate patterns where none exist.
Pareidolia.
But we have also confronted the distinct, undeniable structural reality embedded in these ancient ideas.
Which leaves us and you listening with the final open question.
The big one.
Are these connections we've discussed today merely coincidences, shaped entirely by our own desperate, pattern-seeking human imagination?
Or are we, right now, in the modern digital age, simply rediscovering fundamental geometric and mathematical patterns of reality that have always been there? Patterns that the Sumerians mapped out thousands of years ago. And here's a final thought to consider, synthesizing everything that we've explored.
Let's hear it.
When we look at the ancient myths, the Anunnaki descending from the heavens, the ME acting as beta packets, the base 60 math, are we just projecting our own modern hyperdigital anxieties onto the past?
Are we just seeing faces in the clouds?
Or is it possible that when human beings, regardless of their era, attempt to describe the absolute profound limits of reality, whether they are carving cuneiform into wet clay or typing binary code into a server, there is actually only one universal language available to us?
The language of structure.
Yes.
Wow, are we just speaking the exact same language across a 6,000-year divide?
It's entirely possible.
That is the thought I want you to take with you today. Think back to that feeling of historical vertigo. When you look at the X-ray of human history, it isn't a clean, straight line.
Not at all.
The waters are murky, the timeline fractures, and the patterns repeat. So which side of the fence are you on? Are these echoes of ancient technology just a trick of the mind? Or is human convergence an inescapable law of nature?
Something to ponder.
Keep questioning the structures around you, make sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive, and above all, stay curious.